Jai Gurudev, Swami Chidananda.
Jai Gurudev, Swami Revatikaanta.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm happy to have you on today. Hopefully the first of many episodes we do together.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
So, a little bit of background. I know Swami Chidananda since 2013. I was there the day that he met Paramahamsa Vishwananda, so we met each other at the same time. You were an investment banker working in New York City. You are, of course, Indian descent, born in India, but raised in America. And ever since you joined the mission, you've worked in loads of different capacities, but I'd say more of a focus on knowledge and the teachings of Guruji, and spreading that in different ways. And then, of course, working your way up, becoming a Rishi, Swami, and taking on that responsibility primarily in the States, right?
Yes.
And I think that sets us up exactly for what we want to talk about, because Swami, you were born in India, then you were raised in America, you've come into this Hindu movement, you're a monk now and you're preaching and doing all those things. It's an interesting sort of road to get there. And for me, I was, I'm obviously not Indian, but I lived some years in India in my youth. So from the age of 12 to 15, I was living in India, and I had been to India a few times before then. I had spiritual parents. And I had my own experiences there. And so I think we wanted to compare and contrast a little bit.
Sure.
So let me kick it off with you, being born in India and then transitioning to the States. And what do you remember out of all of this? What's that early phase look like to you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on here, Swami. It's lovely to be here speaking with you. So I was born in India, as you said, but when I was 3 years old, my father passed away and my mother moved to the States. And so when she moved here, she obviously wanted me to fit in, right? So this is maybe 30 years ago. So it's a lot different than how America and the West is now. They weren't so open to Hinduism, people with brown color, also 9/11. So all of those things played a factor. And for me, you know, I'm even ashamed to say it, but that's just the reality. I wanted to fit in. And my mother wanted me to fit in also. And so for me, I was very Western. Sometimes she would take me to the temple once or twice a year recreationally. We'd break a coconut so I can get an A on a test or whatever it might be, right? But for the most part, I really denied my culture. Even the pronunciation of my name, right? I would not even say it in a Hindu way. I'd Americanize it.
Yeah.
And you see that a lot now in the West, where people are taking their Hindu names and being very Western about it. And I was the same, you know. And so I grew up that way. And the thing was, what I started to realize much later is that I really knew nothing about Hinduism. I knew it from a very Puranic stance, right? So we have the deities, we have the rituals, we have the worship, but forget about philosophy.
Right.
And I think one of the main reasons why it's like that is because when you see the first generations of Indians coming to the West, what was their main goal? To be financially stable.
Sure.
Right? They didn't necessarily have time to be reading the Bhagavad Gita or the Puranas or going deeper into philosophy. So what did they take? They said, okay, I'm going to focus on getting some wealth, stabilizing my family. And once in a while, I'll go to the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the culture and environment that I grew up in. And what was really interesting, of course, I'm not going to go into the whole story of how everything played out, but I came across a book called The Autobiography of a Yogi with Paramahamsa Yogananda. And that book changed my entire perspective. It was the first time I started to make the connection between the rituals and the philosophy. And the philosophy opened up an entirely new world for me. And it awakened a certain curiosity. And that curiosity led me to searching, to seeking, if you will. And through that search, I came across our guru, Paramahamsa and Swami Vishwananda. And then he changed my entire life after that. And that we can talk about a bit later.
Sure.
But yeah, I would say that's kind of my perspective growing up as a Hindu in the West.
But I'm curious. So like you said, you know, sometimes you go to the temple, break a coconut, something like that. What was the vibe in these temples? Like, as in, Was everyone else doing the same thing? They were just going to break a coconut to somehow play the role of being traditional?
Exactly. So, I'm not going to generalize it, obviously, but 99% of most Hindus in the West, they're not having Vedanta classes. They don't have a Bhagavad Gita class. They might have some guru-disciple lineage that they come from, but they're not actively going into the study of the philosophy. So for them, being a Hindu, being spiritual, means coming to a temple on Sunday, worshipping the deity, and then leaving. Right? So, and I'm not going to take anything away from that, because I'm not going to question their devotion towards the Lord.
Right.
But it reminds me of this verse in the Gita, where Krishna talks about the 4 types of devotees. Right. So it says the first type of devotee is the one that comes to me when they're ill. The second type is the one that comes to me for material gain. The third comes to me for knowledge. And the fourth knows me and acts accordingly. Yep. So in the same way, I feel that 90% of most Hindus are either in the first or second category. I'm not going to deny that they don't have love for God.
Sure.
But I think the love is sort of sometimes misguided in terms of why are they going, what's the intention behind it?
Well, I think this is what I've observed, and I wonder if you can confirm that. Don't you think they see it more as a culture than they do as a religion? Like, going to the temple is a social gathering. It's a cultural thing that you maintain your culture, but it's not necessarily a matter of the soul and the heart and like, I need to concern myself with moksha and these sort of things.
Yeah, you're spot on.
Yeah.
And that's actually what we're perceiving and seeing real time in Elmira.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, we just opened the inauguration of the temple. You were there, of course. And
Upstate New York.
Upstate New York, yes. Paranita Narasimha Temple. And the issue that we were having right after the inauguration is that many Indians started to come.
It's an issue?
No, I'll explain the issue. It's always nice when people come.
Right.
But then they would drive 4 hours, come for 5 minutes, and then leave, right? And so for me, it was very curious. Like, they're coming for 5 minutes, then they're leaving. And then they would come for like the Garba dance. Yeah. And they would do their sticks and the dancing, but then they would leave after that. So they weren't really staying for the entire ritual, the arti, the kirtan, all of those things. Yeah. So it's spot on to what you were saying, is that there is a culture. They want to maintain the culture. We want to maintain that culture. But there isn't really a deeper desire to ask the question of, what am I really doing this for? Is it just going to finish at the material elements? Or is there something greater to be had? And so that's where we are trying to find the balance between doing events at the temple that are geared more towards the culture, and then doing events that are very traditional. And to make it clear to the people that are coming, like, look, this is not just a community center. This is not a rec center that you come and do and then go. It's also a place of worship where there are 7 sannyasis living and praying every single day. And for them to be aware of that, I think that is one of the main challenges, especially in the Indian community, is how can we take the cultural elements and then also infuse in it the spiritual elements.
I think it's a problem most people face across the religious spectrum, because you see Christianity, there's a lot of Christianity that's just based on Sunday church. Like, you just show up because it's what your parents did and it's what the community does, and then you go and you uphold the culture of your community. And the issue I have, I think, with that, and I think the issue that the Indians face in America, or Hindus in general, whether they're Indian or not, is that you're already seen as somehow of an outsider. Like, your culture is not native to the land. I mean, neither is Christianity, but that's another topic. And so the thing is that you're playing this cultural role of like, okay, on Sunday I go to the temple, but you also don't want to strengthen that which is going to differentiate you even more from the place that you live in. And so it's like, you might go there because in your heart there is an attraction for it, there is an affinity for it, you know, it's your culture, it's your tradition, or in the case of a convert like myself, it's your belief, it's what your conviction. But there is that fear, I feel often, of like, okay, but maybe let's not go too deep, because then the more I go into that, I start putting tilak, I start dressing a certain way. I'm creating more of a separation from the people that I've actually been trying to assimilate with.
Exactly. You don't see them going to the high school with a tilak on.
Right.
And then
right.
also an even deeper element, which I've noticed interestingly, is that we also with the Indian culture, we go sort of to the edge, and then when things start to become a bit too intense, we sort of back off. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. There's a cultural practice of when the child is born in certain traditions in South India, that the child is brought to the temple, and then they're presented with like 4 or 5 elements, and then you pick one, and then that gives like the feeling of what the child is going to be when he grows up or she grows up. So if he picks the jewelry, there'll be like material. If they pick the Gita, it's spiritual. So they call it like the rice eating ceremony. And so a family had called me and said, Swami, can you please conduct the rice eating ceremony? I said, sure. And they're like, okay, we're gonna have this and this, and we'll do the practice, or we'll do the ritual, and we'll pay you whatever it is. I said, okay, well, I'm a sannyasi, so it's not about payment. My thing is, if you're gonna come, it's important that the child also receives the blessing of the deity, right? So the child will receive a blessing for Narasimha as well, and that will help to support that child as it grows up.
Sure.
But the moment they heard that, right, the moment they started to hear about like, wait, what do you mean they're going to receive a blessing of Narasimha? Why don't you just do the Vedic chants and then get it over with? Right? We don't want satsang. We don't want anything to do with Narasimha. We don't want any of these spiritual elements. We're paying you to chant the mantra, do the puja, and then move on, right? And then from there, I never heard from them again.
Right.
And so for a lot of the Indians, and it's very common, even with my mother, bless her heart. Initially, she was happy I was being spiritual. But the moment spirituality started to turn into something deeper, it's like, whoa. Love God, but don't love God so much that you become a monk.
Right.
So that mentality is also there, I feel.
Yeah. And I think, isn't it because like they're asking you to do that ceremony because they probably had it done to them when they were kids, and they were
Exactly.
like, we just need to follow the protocol in a sense, like do what happened to us, like don't add the extras. Yeah.
Dot the I, cross the T.
Yeah.
Call it a day.
Funny. It's a weird thing. Like, so when I was growing up, I wasn't overtly religious. My family wasn't very religious because my biological father, he was strong atheist and very anti-religion of all sorts. And so that was my experience growing up. I didn't know any different. And then my parents divorced.
He's from Germany, correct?
Yeah. I mean, he was born in Brazil, but he has German ancestry. And then my family split up, and then my mom exploded her spirituality outwards because she had been suppressing it, and she had like strong feelings to be spiritual and pursue these things. So we ended up going to India a few times. I went to different ashrams with different gurus, but completely as a kid, like 10 years old, like just checking things out. But what I loved was there was these Amachitrakatha comics that had like these deity stories and whatever else, and I just thought, this is amazing. Like their gods go on adventures and fight demons. It's like, my God dies on the cross. Like, not to say that that's a bad thing, but it was like, it's not the most exciting thing for a kid. Like the imagery of just someone getting whipped and beaten and tortured and then hung on to die on a cross, nailed to a cross. And then I'm hearing about Rama going on adventures with monkeys and killing a 10-headed demon and protecting his wife. I just felt like I was watching my sort of superhero movies, but in a religious environment.
Context.
Yeah. And I really liked it. And then some years later, when I was 12, my mom wanted to live in India. She had these ideas that it was going to be a very spiritual environment, very this, that, and the other. It wasn't what they meant. Like India was going through a phase where it was very much trying to grow economically, trying to compete with the West, trying to do a lot of things in that regard. I ended up going to a boarding school, and it was an international school, so there were some other Westerners there as well. I wasn't the only one. A lot of Asians in the sense of Koreans, Japanese, etc., Thai. But when I got there, I was not a Hindu, but Hindu leaning. Like I had affinity for it, and I thought, cool, I'll learn more about it.
Yeah.
I'll connect with real Hindus, and I'll, maybe.
And your mom was already into it.
Yeah. I mean, she was a meditator.
Yeah.
If you can call it a meditator, a Hindu. Yeah. And so when I got there, I was like, these people want to be like me. I want to be like them. This is weird. And I met very, very, very few people in that entire school. And I was boarding, so you get to meet a lot of people who were overtly Hindu, like showing it to the outside. It was borderline, like, so in the end, I was sharing a room. I remember this experience. There was one year I was sharing a room with two guys. One guy was Hari and the other one was Karan. And Hari, he told me his name was Harry. And I was like, but it's Hari. And then I'm pretty sure that's the name of God and it's pronounced Hari. Yeah. And he's like, no, I'm Harry. And I was like, all right. I called him Harry. And then I remember him taking his shirt off the first night I was there sharing a room, and he had a Brahmin string, right? He had the janeo. And he saw me looking and he was so embarrassed and he was like trying to hide it. And then I asked him, oh, what is that? Because I genuinely didn't know what it was. I was like, what is that? And he's just like, oh, it's just culture. It's just culture. And then he like never spoke about it again with me for like, when we spent a year living in the same room, right? Wow. And my experience was so bizarre because I just realized I don't think there was maybe a handful of people that I could have asked that would have told me that they were proud to be Hindus and owned it and said, that's what we are. And I was in India with Indian colleagues, right? And they were looking at anything Western as being superior, better, something to be aimed at. Everyone wanted to go to either a university in America or in England or wherever. And I remember just being so confused as to why they saw themselves in such a low way. Like this self-denigrating view somehow.
Exactly. Because
everywhere else I had been, I had met such extreme patriotism and pride in themselves. I had met Muslims. They were incredibly proud of their Islamic background and Arab, culture and all of this. In Brazilians, if anyone's listening, they know how patriotic they are. I mean, they are the only ones that might rival the Americans in terms of patriotism. Like when I went to America and I saw like American flags out, like some houses had 3 flags out on the porch, and I'm just like, yep.
Yeah, it can be intense depending on where you are in America.
I was like, I know this. I've seen people like this in Brazil, but that's my point. But Indians, ironically, were the only ones I ever met, maybe a couple of Japanese, that were self-deprecating. Like they were saying, it's superstition, it's old, it's mythology, it's like somehow you're stupid if you believe in that stuff.
Why do you think they're self-deprecating?
The difficulty is when you go to India, you know how it is. There's a lot of the poverty, there's a lot of dirt, there's a lot of things that we can, materially speaking, look at and objectively say that's inferior. And I think they do a tough time separating the two things because it's difficult to say, why did we become like this? Isn't this a direct effect of our superstition and our belief and our tradition? That look at what that produces, right? And there are things that, unless you have a deeper understanding, they do look weird. Like worshipping cows. The Ayurvedic use of cow feces, cow urine, cow whatever, and then you can see somebody being, let's say, overtly believing in those kind of things and engaging with those things. If you don't understand, or if you don't have a context with which to look at that, you might go, these people are just insane, right? They're really like backwards. And I think there's always a sophistication to the Abrahamic conception of God as being not like us, immaterial, impersonal, or personal, but let's say transcendent. And when the Hindus talk about elephant gods and monkey gods and lion gods and this kind of God, I think they just think it's primitive.
Yeah, personally, I feel that's where the Indian culture took a left turn, is when we start to just focus on the rituals without understanding the philosophy.
Yeah.
And that, I feel, made everything, like you put it perfectly. When we start to not understand why we do the things that we do, then we start to become embarrassed. Maybe that guy, Harry, maybe he doesn't even know the significance of the string.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe it's like, I grew up, I put it on, now I'm embarrassed of it, but I'm going to wear it because of some fear or whatever. My parents, whatever it might be. So I don't know what the moment was when the emphasis on the philosophy, actually the emphasis on studying in the Gurukul, the emphasis of a guru teaching us this knowledge, where that started to disappear.
Yeah.
And, observing and traveling in the United States, that one thing I do have to say is that the millennials and the generations after the millennials, there is a comeback in the sense that people are starting to ask the questions. Okay, my parents' parents were doing those things, but why?
Yeah.
And I think the moment we start asking why, that starts to then take us on a journey where we start studying. Then we see actually how amazing the philosophy is. Because as we know, the philosophy is thousands of years older than most Abrahamic religions. And then there's something that I can feel proud of. And I see that happening more and more with the younger generation. But in India, I feel it's completely different. In India, we're going the opposite way.
It's weird.
They're becoming so westernized. I mean, there's this nationalist movement and all of this, but let's be honest, it's not really based on the foundation of, am I studying philosophy? No. Am I going to a gurukul? So, yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think also, if you look even a step beyond that, like having material ambition, I think is not a problem. I mean, it's kind of necessary in this world as it functions. I don't think we're at a stage where if you're not materially prospering in one way or another, you're going to have a tough life. Yeah. Sure. So I understand all of that. But I think one of the coolest ideas of Hinduism is that you have these 4 goals of life. The idea of Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha, I think it's such a perfect balance of what life should be intuitively. I don't even speak about it on a logical level. It feels right. So it's this idea that Dharma is the foundation of everything else. Like you have to learn what is righteousness, what is correct, what is the true purpose of things, right and wrong. So morals, values, ethics, right? And then from there, you can pursue Artha, material prosperity, and Kama, pleasure, desires. But all of those things will only be done with the foundation of Dharma. And conservative Christian cultures and other religions, they also kind of share these sentiments. Like if you speak to people who are a bit more profound about their faith, they will know it's like, yeah, you can make money, you can get married, do all those things, but not at any cost. Like you can't break a sort of moral code that we have to agree upon. And Hinduism has that too. Yeah. And then it has an even better thing, which is, and beyond Artha and Kama, there's Moksha, this idea of liberation, of attainment of the Supreme. And for that, I require to detach from everything else. Exactly. And so even the commitments that I do make in life towards making money, towards family, towards friends and all of that are not meant to be forever. They're meant to be a phase of my life. And so these phases of life, I think, is so rich. It's so real and corresponds to our experience as human beings.
Absolutely.
That it's like, you don't even know what you have. Like, it's so valuable. Like, there's a reason so many Westerners take on Hindu belief systems, because we read this, we look at this without the corruption of, and this is a benefit, I think, sometimes of being a Westerner, learning about Hinduism. We don't see the Indian issues, like the socio-cultural issues that sometimes become entangled with the religion and the philosophy.
That's it.
And so we just take the philosophy from the book without all that externality. So we look at Bhagavad Gita and we go, yeah, this is superior. This is amazing.
Exactly.
Just follow.
Exactly.
We don't see the open sewage and the poverty discrepancies and caste systems and all of this. That's it.
Yeah. I think, it's like you said, when you approach the Gita without already a preconceived notion of what it represents as what's in there, you're open. Actually, you display the quality of humility.
Right.
And then you're able to perceive something deeper. But I think growing up in India, let's say, or growing up in an Indian family, maybe you're watching Mahabharata on Stars, right? Maybe you're reading the comics. So in your mind, I already know Krishna.
Yeah.
Right? I already know the story. I know chapter 2, verse 47. Perform your action, but do not be attached to the results. Like every Indian memorizes that verse, right? And they have their own understanding of what that verse means.
Yeah.
So I've also found that a lot in the West, is that the Western people are genuinely humble and curious. And in that humility, they're able to perceive a deeper level of Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma. Because Sanatana Dharma is an onion. Right? It's literally an onion. And if you're just looking at the surface of it, sometimes the surface of an onion is not clean. But if you go a few more layers, then you start to see the actual purity of it.
But to defend the Indians, to give
But to make it clear, I'm not bashing the Indians. I am Indian, as you can tell. But go ahead.
No, but just as an observation, I think the Westerners are circumstantially humble, because it's like, if you don't know anything, you're almost forced to be humble, right? And I think the Indians are suffering from a very dangerous scenario that happens to all sorts of people, which is when you have a little bit of knowledge.
Yes.
Because in any field, Westerners included, any kind of person, any field, when you have a little bit of knowledge, is when you're liable to think you have a lot of knowledge, and then you act like you have a lot of knowledge, and that's the worst. Exactly. So like, the best is sometimes to be completely ignorant about a topic, because it forces humility out of you.
Spot on.
And I think that's what often goes on. Because when eventually when those Westerners start to learn a bit, I've experienced a lot of highly arrogant Western Hindus as well, that sometimes can get even more militant, because they sometimes lack one very key thing, one key ingredient of Hindu culture that the Western culture does not have, and that is the diversity. The diversity of belief and expression and everything else, because I've often met Western Hindus who start to treat Hinduism like an Abrahamic religion. Like, we are the only truth. We are the only correct way. And you see that, Hinduism isn't teaching you that.
It's true.
You are like imposing Western ideas onto Hinduism. And so there, I think that it's give and take. They might be more humble in the beginning, but sometimes it goes a little worse down the road.
That's true. Yeah, I think it's, as I say, it's always not good to generalize.
No, for sure.
But what I am noticing is with newer generations of Indians, they're much more open.
Have you met a lot? Like,
I meet a lot of them in my travels, and I do a lot of like Gita classes with them.
Yeah.
And so for them, they're very open, receptive. And the amazing thing about Indian culture, so we're talking about spirituality and the culture. The culture is amazing in the sense that if you look at Indians, they're the highest net earners in the United States. They have the least amount of divorces. They have the least amount of violent crimes. So from a cultural perspective, they're doing amazing things in the West.
Sure.
But maybe from the spiritual perspective, they're not going as deep as they possibly could, for whatever reasons that might be.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as I'm doing the Gita classes, as I'm doing these talks, the ones that are joining are younger people. And for them, it's always the same narrative. Yes, I know about Krishna, I know about this or that, but I want to know why. And so when I do these talks, they'd be like, I learned more about Hinduism just listening to you for 1 hour than I did my whole life going to the temple. So I think that knowledge combined with humility, no matter what race, gender, color you are, it's the best combination.
For sure. Can you talk to me a little bit about so I'm curious, because there's a lot of Indians in America. I also spent some years in England, a lot of Indians in England as well. But for example, in Germany, less so. In other places that I go to, I sometimes travel to Portugal and teach there, less so. What do you feel is the main thing that these second, third generation Indians are looking for? Like, what kind of questions do they ask? What is that thing that sort of drives them to come to your lecture, to come to your Gita class?
Sure. I think the drive is common in all people, which is the reduction of suffering. So most of these people, they have anxiety, right? They're confused about if they should stay in their job or not. And of course, when you grow up in an Indian culture, you're pretty much, there's no real movement for wiggle, right? You're either going to be a doctor, or you're going to be an engineer, or you're going to be a lawyer, something along those lines, and you're going to work really hard. But then the question becomes I'm doing this, but I'm actually not so happy. So what can I do to change that? Yeah, I go to the temple, but it's not doing anything for me. I'm breaking the coconuts, I'm wearing the rings, I'm going to the Sraj. It's not doing anything for me. Is there something deeper in this tradition that can help me? And so that's usually how they're approaching it. And I would say the greatest barrier is this idea of being afraid of going deeper. Because I think a lot of them are programmed, like you said, we have the 4 elements, 4 goals of life, Atta, Karma, Moksha, Dharma. They see one, if I do dharma or moksha, then I have to sacrifice artha or kama. So for them, it's, I want to be rich, but I also don't want to suffer, right? And so they come. But then as we start talking, they're like, well, does this mean I have to renounce the world? You know, my parents warned me about this. They don't want me to be a monk. They don't want me to be a sannyasi. Because for Indian parents, that's the worst. It's like a huge curse. They're like, my parents warned me about swamis like you that inspire us to give up everything and go off into a cave or come to the ashram in Elmira.
Yeah.
And most of, maybe some of you are listening, most of the time I tell them, do not quit your job. And do not say to your parents you're not going to get married. Do both of those things,
Right.
but practice tyaga. Practice inner detachment, inner renunciation. I think that's what we're really, even what we teach, what our guru teaches, is all about that inner detachment.
Well, I think it's definitely the more mainstream teaching because, on the peripheries, there's always going to be some people that are ripe for renunciation and whatever else on all levels. But I think generally speaking, we're not trying to change people's lives externally. We're trying to change them internally. Exactly. And I think that's the main focus. I think also, it's funny. I was thinking about my experiences again back in India. I was just trying to remember if there was any incident whatsoever where I felt like there was anyone who was open to having a conversation with me about Hinduism, and the answer is no. But when I went to England, I met Guruji.
Yeah.
So first summer that I was in England, post India, is when I met Guruji, and within a year, I started to identify myself way more as a Hindu, and I took initiation and all of these things. So for my last 1.5 to 2 years of school, I was openly Hindu, and the people at school knew that. And there was a lot of Indians there as well, Indian kids, British Indians, second generation, third generation, same situation. And they were actually very respectful. It was somehow different, the experience I had there than I had in India. In India, if I had said to them I'm Hindu, they would have looked at me extremely confused, like, why would you do that? Like, why are you going backwards? Yes. When I told the British Asians, the British Indians that I'm Hindu, they almost felt proud. Yeah. They were like proud that, because they're the minority there. Yeah. And they were like, somehow this feeling of, we're not inferior. You see, even white people, even Westerners see value in our culture. And they started to talk with me in a more open way. They were more inspired by that. It was, I actually had a nice experience sharing that I was a Hindu with the British Indians. And the thing is that I feel, why I'm sharing this is because I think it's so interwoven. Culture, religion, racism, race expectations, and in society as a whole. And the reason I want to say that is because I feel the whole world is waking up a little bit from its collective holiday that it went on. And what I mean by that is that the world comes from traditions. We've all been traditional at some stage, different continents and different cultures, more conservative. And as the world has advanced, we've become more explorative, like trying new things, breaking the boundaries, breaking free, being much more liberal with everything. Yeah. Sexuality, jobs, goals, clothing, fashion, music, movies, everything, right? And I feel like that's good on one level. We're exploring the boundaries of human possibility and expression and all of that. But I feel like collectively, tell me if you agree with this, collectively, most cultures, most religions are almost feeling like we may have gone a bit too far and we need to do a course correction. Doesn't mean we need to go back to a hardcore conservative mindset, but I feel especially with the youth, they're falling back in love with the idea of marriage. They're falling back in love with the idea of Sunday church or temple, or being a bit more moral and correct and less, you know what I mean? Yeah,
absolutely. And I see that a lot in the United States. It's that they, actually I see it also in Miami. And this is actually going off a bit topic, but I gave a talk, and there was a person that I have a connection with. She's Russian, and she's from Russian Orthodox. And when she picked me up from the airport, we were having a conversation, and she was like, it's so crazy that all of my friends, they're all in their 20s, 30s. They're telling me that on Fridays, they're going to Russian Orthodox Church. And for her mind, she couldn't make any sense of it because she's like, just before COVID, on Fridays, we're partying. Now they're telling me they're going to liturgy at a Russian Orthodox church.
Miami.
In Miami.
Yeah.
Well, I'm picking you up to go to an Om chanting in Miami on a Friday night. Right? So it's what you're observing is actually what's happening. Is that people are looking for things that they can go deeper in.
Because I think we're trying to satisfy the heart.
Yeah, even Western yoga, right? If you look at the last 20 years, it's become so diluted. We have beer yoga, goat yoga, all types of yoga.
Yeah.
And very asana based. But the amazing thing, what I've noticed with the practitioners of these practices is that they are saying, I want to go deeper. Right? And that's really interesting. They're like, this is nice. I'm enjoying this. But the majority of them, they are looking to go deeper into yogic philosophy. The Indians in the West, in America, they're looking to go deeper. I'm not sure what's happening in India. I don't really have a pulse for that. But yeah, everybody is looking for something deeper. And like you said, they're looking to go in the heart.
It gives me hope, man. I actually feel happy about that because, I don't know, man, sometimes you look around and you're just like, the things that get famous and big and prominent and whatever, like these kind of yogas and whatever else, you just go like, man.
Yeah.
Like, I know I shouldn't judge. And I know that we're, very open-minded. But sometimes you just look at stuff and you're just like, really? Yeah. Like, really? This is what you choose to believe in? And that's been a source of frustration for me for a long time. Like, as I travel and I meet people and I try to spread Guruji's message in the Gita, I see that some people, they listen to what I have to say and they love it and they like it. Others, they go, oh, what an interesting idea. But, I follow this and I follow that. And I dig a little deeper to find out what it is that they follow. And I'm just like, really? Yeah. Like, really? Yeah. Like, that is... And I'm very aware that right now that's a big judgment because I'm aware that people are on different stages of a spiritual awakening or journey and that actually different things are suitable to people at different stages. But I'm not going to lie, I'm just being honest. It is frustrating sometimes to see how captured by superficiality people are and how afraid they are of what lies beyond the norms. I was at a happiness congress. People go and talk about happiness. And I was one of the lecturers there and I arrived a little bit earlier and so I was able to sit in the audience and watch some of the people that were going before me. And I was watching and I was listening to what they were saying and I was thinking like one of them was teaching about how to be happy by spending more time with your kids, play with your kids, don't ignore them, don't be on the phone, sit with them, be with them, play with them, etc. And I was like, I don't disagree, but it's a very weird simplification of happiness.
Yeah.
Then the next one was talking about happiness, leaning a little bit more in the direction that I would go in, but focusing a lot on language, like what language you choose to use and the tonality of your language and like, aggressive communication versus non-aggressive communication. And I was like, again, like it feels to me like you're all scratching at the periphery, but you're all missing the point. Yes. And I got up on stage and I remember I saw the organizer at the back of the hall. She was looking at me like happy about that. She had a monk on stage about to speak. And I start off by saying, I know this is the Congress of happiness, but I'm not going to talk about happiness because nobody here even knows what happiness is. Wow. And they was just like, is he allowed to say that? But I was like, no. Cancelled, yeah. But I felt like I needed to say it because I was like, the problem we have with society, and I think this is true of all societies, if we lower our standards, we redefine words to a lower level than they actually deserve to be at, we are collectively lowering the standard of human experience by lowering the standard of words. So for example, happiness. If you say having a good job, a stable job, and then going out on the weekend with your friends is happiness, to say, for example, this is the best example. I'm sure you've gone through this. Imagine you're suffering, you're going through some difficulty, you come home, you tell your friend, you call your friend, you're like, oh, you don't believe what happened to me today. That guy lied to me, and then I went out of my work, I was already annoyed, and then I stepped in a puddle, and then a car went and splashed me, and it's just like, oh, what a terrible day. And then the friend goes, you think that's bad? Let me tell you what happened to me last week. And then we're like, start to compare suffering. And then the worst part is that the person who initially shared goes, oh, wow, like actually I feel better now just because I know someone went through something even worse. And they'll be like, that's happiness. I feel good now. And every time I see that, and I've heard it so many times, and I've seen it so many times, people doing that, I just go like, what on earth? Like, how can you call that happiness? So your happiness standard now is suffering a little less than your neighbor. That's we will term that as happiness. And then no wonder society is the way it is, because you have no north, you have no compass, you have no ideals. And Chida, man, one of the things that I've been preaching a lot in the last couple of years, and I've been trying to focus on, and I spoke with Myron, who was also on the podcast, and he agrees with me on this. I think there's 3 areas of activity. There's the ideal, there's the prohibited, whether that be by material law or spiritual law, don't murder people, stuff like that. Then there's a big gray area, which is the permissible. Like, you can do this.
Yeah.
It's not ideal, it's not prohibited, but you can do it, right? And I think what most people know these days is they know the permissible and the prohibited. Almost nobody knows what the ideal is. Like, you go to anybody on the street, you ask them, what's the ideal life look like? Like, morally, occupationally, like, what is the best? And I think people don't know, man. And you just have to look, let me redefine what happiness is. Happiness is when you have complete harmony and coherence between your mind, emotions, actions, thoughts, and you're in contact with your true self. You're in contact with the source of that true self. And the minute you just say something like that, they're like, whoa, what are you talking about? True self, source of the true self. And that sometimes gets me fired up in a negative way, because I'm just like, oh, how broken societal standards are. But when you tell me that people are interested and there's a comeback coming on, I'm not gonna lie, it does inspire me a bit. I go like, wow, maybe there is space to do something good here.
Yeah, I mean, let's qualify that. I feel at the core, people are searching and people are interested. And of course, if you grew up in a more traditional place like Russia, then you have the Russian Orthodox elements and traditions to lean to.
Yeah.
If you are growing up as an Indian, you have some traditions to lean to. But a lot of times in the West, maybe you don't have a deeply rooted tradition. Maybe you don't have a deeply rooted set of practices that's been passed down that you can go to understand, dig deeper into. So even though you might have that longing, where are you going to turn to? You're going to turn to social media. You're going to turn to Instagram. You're going to turn to Google. And you're going to find things that you're thinking, okay, maybe this is something that can help me. So it's almost like the blind leading the blind. So I think the issue is not that people are not longing for something deeper. Those practices are just not available. Or if they are, they're hidden on mountains and mountains and mountains of techniques that have been pushed to the front due to algorithms or whatever else. Like maybe we have something called a get rich quick scheme. Now we can create a phrase, feel something quickly scheme. I just made that up, by the way. Which is essentially, I give you a practice, you do it, you have some type of pleasure activated, and then you say, that is my God. That is spirituality. And I think that's where people are falling short. And that's where I see what we're doing as something quite crucial, in the sense that I believe we are providing practices that are thousands of years old, that have withstood the test of time, that we can say we have dedicated our lives to. And we believe if you do these practices, it will help you to awaken love. And that's the main thing that I try and teach. Everywhere I go, whatever I'm doing, I say from the very beginning, these practices might not be for you. These practices are thousands of years old. But if you do it sincerely, I feel that it will help you to feel what you are looking for, to realize what you are looking for. And so that's what gives me inspiration. That's what gives me the drive, the motivation, if you will, to go out and speak. It's because I know at the end of the day, most people on this planet are searching.
What's the reception like?
Oh, it's mixed. Because as we know, Krishna says in the Gita, true sattvic happiness starts like poison in the beginning and ends in nectar. So no, we're not pitching a practice that's going to give you a quick I don't even know.
Feel something quickly, whatever.
Feel something quickly scheme, right?
Yeah.
So there has to be a deep longing, a humility, and maybe some inspiration where they say, okay, the Swami, I feel something from him. I feel something maybe from his guru. I'm going to give it a shot. And so it's 50-50. I'm not expecting everybody to say, yes, I'm going to start doing it. But you'll be surprised. I'm surprised that there are actually more people than I thought that are open and receptive to these practices and going deeper.
Question, you mentioned, algorithms that push things into people, like different practices and whatever else. Often I get the feeling like we're competing with other spiritual and religious people. And it's been a dilemma at times, because at one point I'm thinking, do I want to make them spiritual in the Swami Vishwananda brand of spirituality, or am I happy for them to just be spiritual irrespective of how they're spiritual, right? And I had to do some soul searching. And the thing is, I think I actually land a bit more in the first one. And the reason for that is only because it's the only one I can vouch for.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying that in principle I'm against people becoming spiritual irrespective of their path. I think in theory I'm for that. But because I haven't practiced those paths, I haven't walked those paths, I don't know what comes as a result of those other techniques and those other places. I can't really recommend them as openly and as freely. And so I end up trying to push people towards Guruji more so. And now in America, for example, you have Swami Narayan, you have ISKCON, you have a lot of people that are, I guess, doing something very similar to what we're doing. Not identical, of course, but similar, Sadhguru. What do you think differentiates us from them in a way? What do you think is important to emphasize maybe when we speak to people and when we present ourselves there, so that we don't just get seen as, one more in an ocean of so many talking the same stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say firstly, the greatest algorithm is raga dvesha. Right? We're pulled towards things that we find attractive, and then we run away from things that we find repulsive. And so if you really want to get people, you do some very simple breathing pranayama practices. You have them do it for 10 minutes. They feel, I'm seeing things. And then you could build $1 billion business on that, right? So if you want to talk about the greatest algorithm, just focus on raga dvesha, game over, we'll call it a day. But of course, we're not doing that. We are in the field of inspiring people to love. And so when you ask what is the difference between us and another organization, I don't need to name them, is, for me, bhakti. It's devotion and the ability for the practice to awaken devotion. So I'm not saying that other practices are not preaching or presenting bhakti. I just feel in my heart that the practice that I can share, that we can share, can help to awaken love. If somebody comes to me and says, I feel love to that other practice, I say, go for it.
Cool.
Like, do it, no problem. But because what I see is an umbilical cord between our guru and the practice. And for our guru is the personification of love. And so if I give something that is given by my guru, I create an umbilical cord between them and Guruji. And then I pray and hope and his will that grace flows through to them and they awaken into bhakti.
The reason I love what you just said is because I think one of the biggest weaknesses that the Hindu community has worldwide is how divided we are. Like, man, like we have so much infighting within the tradition. It's so segregated. I mean, look at India. Every state has its own language and almost its own culture. I understand that, but still, when it comes to this, to the platform of spirituality, we need to be far more united than we are divided. And the reason I named specifically Swami Narayan and ISKCON and all of those is because there are members on both sides of the coin that see us as being almost non-different. And so therefore, let's work together and we're happy no matter where things land, as long as we're bringing this consciousness to people. And then there's the other half that says, no, we're completely different. No. It's us versus them. That's they do Tilak this way, we do it this way. Therefore, you cannot go there. It's very bad. And I'm happy to hear what you say, because I'm similar in thought of like, look, I'm here making an invitation. Come feel the love that I have felt. Come experience the gift that I've received. But if it's not for you, that's
No
all
problem.
good, man. But
No
I
problem.
still would like to encourage you to take on some brand of spirituality or something along those lines. Again, with the honesty, the caveat of the honesty that I shared earlier, which is I would prefer if you came to somewhere where I can vouch for it myself.
Sure.
And I think that's just me being a responsible human being. I cannot recommend something to you that I don't know, but I also shouldn't condemn it. And that's an important point. I have no issue when an ISKCON person comes to me, for example, and says, I don't know about your guru. I don't know about this path. I have questions. I have no problem. When they come with criticisms, because from the outside it looks a certain way, or there I'm already like, wait a minute. Yeah. And vice versa. If a Bhakti Marga person were to do that,
Absolutely.
also not a fan. Yeah. And I
Absolutely.
think Hindus, Indians in general, need to get the message, because I see the Christian world often far more united. I see the Islamic world way more united when it comes to important matters. We have a crisis of purpose in the world. People don't have purpose.
And also, even though some Abrahamic religions might have some minor differences, ultimately they're moving towards saying, if you believe in Jesus Christ, we're all in the same boat. But for us, if you believe in a formless God, you're actually much different than me, because I believe in form. If you believe in Krishna and I believe in Rama, oh, you believe in Kali, oh my God.
Shit, it gets worse. If you believe in the wrong part of Krishna's life, if you're a Dwaraka Krishna fan and I'm a Vrindavan Krishna fan, we can't share a meal together.
Exactly.
Like, what?
So I think when we establish those types of hard and fast rules, it's impossible to unite and grow Sanatana Dharma. Because ultimately that's where we all can find common ground in. Even when I was in the United States, when I first came to New York from Germany, I was trying to give some talks and I was doing some things, and a few organizations, they're like, no, we don't even welcome you. Forget about giving a talk, not even welcome me. Right? I'm an initiated Swami in the Sanatana Dharma tradition. If you're a Christian and a bishop or a priest from another lineage comes, you're going to welcome them, regardless
I'd hope so. I think there are maybe some exceptions, but I'd hope so.
Let's hope so, right?
Yeah.
And so to have that type of mentality, I think that's where the tradition, that's where Sanatana Dharma is kind of shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah. So I think to touch back to our original topic, talking about Indian identity, preaching in the West, etc. I think that would be a clear message from this conversation. It's like Indians who are there, be more, I was going to use the word proud, but be more like willing, let's say open-minded to seeing the depth of what you have rather than the superficiality of it. But at the same time, in pursuing that, try to get rid of the downside, which is the separation, this divisive mentality, because you are already in the minority.
Sure.
And to create even bigger minority makes no sense whatsoever.
Exactly.
The same applies to Western Hindus. In the Western world, we are in the minority, always.
Yeah.
And yet we are creating these divisions. I'm not naive. If somebody comes and criticizes Guruji and speaks negatively against him, I'll push back.
Yes.
I will push back because I don't stand for that. But I have befriended people from ISKCON, from Swami Narayan, from Ramakrishna, from all kinds of people, as long as they show the right mentality. I also have the right mentality when I approach those people. Sure. I think it's so important when we're talking about identity, culture, religion, all of these things, to try to always bridge the divide rather than accentuate the divide, make the divisions even bigger. That's a huge problem. It actually is a problem that I see across the human landscape. Left politics, right politics. The divide is bigger than ever.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Gender wars, race wars, all of these things. In some ways they're getting better. In other ways, man, it's so divisive. It's so polarizing. It's you're with us, you're against us.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll share a controversial story, but I'll do it. I'll risk it. When the Ukraine-Russia war broke out, I was here in the ashram. And one of my responsibilities that I have is that I'm overseeing Russia from Bhakti Marga's perspective, right? And there were some Ukrainian devotees who approached me as the representative and said, we'd like to have a conversation with you to understand Bhakti Marga's stance on the whole thing, and then just give us some general advice and have a conversation. So I did. And one of the mentalities that very quickly came across, and this was very early on in the war, so I can excuse it given the context, but was that either you're with us or against us. In the sense of either you support what Russia's doing or you support what Ukraine's stance is. Like, you cannot have any kind of nuanced position, middle ground. It's one or the other.
Black and white.
Yeah. And I sort of remember feeling completely like, this is ridiculous. And I said to them quite openly, do you know how ridiculous your statement is? You're saying that if we don't do something actively, physically, to support Ukraine in this situation, it means we are against Ukraine. This is so nonsensical, because that means that every other conflict that's ever happened on earth that you have not done something about, that means you are taking a stance. You are against those people or whatever. And ironically, I said to them at the time, Israel-Palestine, which is now a topic, but it wasn't at that time to the degree that it is now. I said to them, which side do you take on that? Israel-Palestine. Wait, I don't need to ask you. Let me observe your actions. What have you done to defend the Israelis or the Palestinians? And their answer was, of course, nothing. They haven't done a thing, right? And yet they're willing to sit there and point the fingers and condemn and saying, unless you do this, you're against us or against that or whatever. And okay, we all got to a much better conclusion in the end. We spoke it through. It was all fine. But it showed me something in that moment, that it's like how divisive the human mentality can be, and how we start pitching people against each other when it's like, wait a minute, what happened to intelligence and nuance? And I can agree with a little bit of this. I can agree with a little bit of that. I think that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I'm not fully on board with this. I'm not fully on board with that. And I think that that would be wonderful if we could bring that back into all discourses, religious discourse, social discourse, all of this, because it's like, okay, you're an Indian in America. Take some of Indian culture, take some of American culture, make it work together. You don't have to be black or white. I'm a white guy. I believe in Hinduism. Maybe we can take a bit of this and a bit of that. Like, when I go to Vrindavan, I don't have to start saying, oh, this is all magic. I should bring open sewage back to Germany.
Exactly.
Germany needs open sewage. That's what we're missing to progress to the next level. Like, this is nonsense. You don't have to say one is better than the other across the board. You can say, Germany would benefit a lot from the Bhagavad Gita. I believe it would.
Absolutely.
And Vrindavan would benefit from some German engineering.
Absolutely.
It would.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like, these things can marry.
Yeah, and actually this is also kind of what I'm observing as well, is that a lot of times also with Indians in the West is this idea that white people are taking our culture or they're colonizing us. Right?
Cultural appropriation.
Cultural appropriation. And for me, yeah, okay, maybe there are some elements of it, but at the other side, they're also practicing it in a very sincere and humble way. And if we know what Sanatana Dharma is, it's a path towards the eternal truth. And everybody can practice it. Everybody has a right to practice it. And so rather than seeing divide, saying, okay, let's come together and let's find inspiration in how they are practicing the culture. And at the same time, also instill maybe some cultural elements that can help them to see things in a different perspective, right? To remove maybe some Abrahamic samskaras, if you will, and finding that balance. And I think if we can apply that to everything in our life, the world will be a much better place. But we see, what are we seeing in this world right now? The media is pushing towards a black and white narrative, right? That's how it is with everything. It's like a gun is on your head and they say, you have to choose a side. But the very fact about Sanatana Dharma is that it's gray, right? Nobody's going to sit here and be like, you know what? Krishna actually caused the genocide of 2 million people on the battlefield in Kurukshetra.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want to look at it from that lens, horrible.
Yeah.
If you want to look at it from another lens, okay, that's a different perspective. So nobody's saying that because I believe in the Gita, I condone killing at all levels in every way, in every moment of life. And that's what people are trying to force us into. If you believe this, X, then you must believe Y.
Yeah.
Like, no, I believe in X, but I also don't want to believe in Y. Maybe I believe in Z or D, right? So that narrative, that mentality is what's creating all of this chaos.
No, I 100% agree with you. I had a conversation recently with an Indian American. And she goes, "Oh, I heard you guys have a new temple in America." I said, "Yeah, upstate New York in Elmira." And she says to me, "Oh, that's Trump country, isn't it?" And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Oh, yeah, they all vote for Trump there." And I was like, "Well, first of all, I'm pretty sure that's a massive generalization. Second of all, it was very clear to me that she meant it in a derogatory way. Like, this is a bad thing, right?" And I was like, there wasn't the circumstances with which to push back and to engage, but I left there thinking, I have no issues with people disliking Trump's policies or him even as a person or whatever else, but can we make the conversation more nuanced instead of just saying that's Trump country? It's like, no, those people may have belief in this particular thing which I have an issue with, because if you just generalize the whole thing, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like it's a huge problem. But I have a question for you. Where do you see Guruji in all of this? Because I've had a lot of conversations with not only him but others around him for a long time as to how Guruji perceives the intersection between culture and spirituality. Like, does he propagate Indian culture or just Indian spirituality? How do you think people should see that? Because we are dressed in Indian clothes, we have Indian festivals, we eat Indian food. Like, there is an Indianization in some extent. How do you see all of that?
Well, I feel that at the end of the day, Guruji is all about awakening love in God, or I'm sorry, love in man and humanity. Right? That's the mission statement. Just love. So beyond anything else, that's where it's at. And that crosses beyond any culture or traditions or even any type of actually religions, if we're really speaking about love. So that's his main goal, in my personal opinion. Now, the way that he does that is through utilizing the Vedic tradition. And in the Vedic tradition, I've always seen it as a cross mixture of culture and practices. And what I mean by that is we can have a philosophy, which is a philosophy of Vishishtadvaita or Bhakti-centered. But then there are the cultural elements that help us to establish that bhav or that feeling and to go deeper in it. So for example, if you go to a church, you're not going to go to a church wearing a football gear, right? If you're going to go work in Wall Street, you're not going to show up with shorts and basketball shoes. And so in that sense, if he is propagating the Vedic tradition as a way to realize bhakti, he also has to help us to cultivate the identity and the feeling of the things that we are practicing. So when we go into a temple, we should wear clothes that help us to awaken that bhakti in a deeper way. When we wear a tilak, it should help us to remind the philosophy that we're following. So I think at the end of the day, it is bhakti and love, but the natural consequence is the bleeding into a culture that helps us to embrace these philosophies in a deeper way.
I like it. So you're essentially saying that Guruji brings the cultural elements in to support what's actually important, which is the spiritual elements.
Exactly.
So it's like a 1-2 scenario where the spiritual thing is the more important.
Exactly. So for me, I would never say that there's one human being on this earth that would not resonate with Guruji's ultimate philosophy, which is love.
Oh,
but he might,
nice.
Right? But they might not agree with the practices that he uses to help us to
the way it's
them.
presented in a way.
Sure.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. I would agree with that 100%. That I think Guruji is for everyone, actually, and what he's bringing is for everyone, but not everyone may identify with the way it's being brought, like the context within which it is found.
Yeah. Or initially.
Yeah.
Because then we know I know people that as they go deeper into the love, I'll never wear a sari. And then every day they're wearing a sari, right? So I think the love also awakens a natural feeling towards the tradition and the culture.
You're right. That's an interesting topic. I don't want to necessarily go into it today because it's a lot to unpack there, but like the cultural, let's say, elements of even Bhakti Marga's activities, like how, because Guruji, he's a funny one. Like in some ways, he's very open-minded. In other ways, not so much. I remember having a conversation with him. You heard about the Krishna West movement? Like
I have.
Yeah. So in ISKCON, there's this, let's say, a branch that believes that that the practice should be done within the cultural standards of wherever the practice is being done. So Westerners could dress as gentlemanly
Jeans
Westerners, and
collared shirts.
Japanese can wear like Japanese culture, but practice Vedic, let's say, ritual or Vedic worship. Let's put it like this. So I was telling Guruji about this because he had heard from somebody, and he asked me, "Do you know about this?" And so I shared what I knew from what I had gathered, and he had such a funny reaction. His first reaction was, "Well, but in our temple we don't do that. People can come as they are. Right? They can come with t-shirt and jeans to our temple. It's not a problem as long as they come in a modest and respectful dress. It's fine." And that's a fact. That is true. So I agreed with him. I said, "Yeah, that's true." And then I said to him, "But how far would you be willing to let it go? Like in the sense of, Guruji, I'm a monk. Could I rock up tomorrow to the ashram in some jeans and a t-shirt?" And then he just smiled at me and said, "If you want to get in trouble, yeah." And I was just like, "Oh, okay, well," I took my shot. And then he says, "No, balance is needed." Like he says to me, because the thing is this, it's not that a dhoti and a kurta is spiritually superior to jeans and t-shirt. But he said, there's a great value in creating psychological differentiation, and this is somehow what you were speaking to, between the uniform or the code of conduct or the environment you surround yourself in when you're being exclusively spiritual and when you're engaging in the material world. So it's like a police officer who wears his police uniform when he goes to work, and it differentiates him from the other people. It becomes clear to the people that he is on duty. This is a police officer. This is his function. This is his purpose, etc. And so he said, similarly, spiritually, we have to do that. And I know that there is some pushback that will say, yeah, but a Shaivite will also dress similarly to a Vaishnava. Others may also have a Shikha, even though they don't believe. Yeah, you can't be perfect. It's not like there's a silver bullet that just solves the whole thing. But nobody can deny that generally it creates a differentiation, and it makes it clear that this is what these people are doing, whilst having the openness that somebody can rock up in jeans and a t-shirt at the same time. But anyway, like I said, I didn't want to go too far.
I mean, just to close on that, just an analogy that I would give is, let's say you go play basketball for the first time. Is somebody going to say you can't play basketball with jeans and a polo? No, you can go and you can shoot and you can play. But as you start to develop a greater love for basketball, you're going to be more naturally inclined to wear things that help you to facilitate a better performance.
Right, right.
And so in the same way, as we go deeper in the spiritual path, we're going to obviously do things, identify with things, wear things that help us to go deeper into the practices that we're studying.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I would see or frame.
I think we'll leave that for another conversation, though,
Sure.
because I think it's a hot topic. There's a lot of pushback possible in different ways, but an interesting one only in the sense of like, I'm always curious about how to connect with people and how to like lower the barriers that people erect, like between themselves and taking the essence of spirituality.
Yeah, for me, it's really interesting. I mean, maybe we can even just close on that because we had discussed kind of bringing in Guruji at the end. Is honestly, the first time I've ever been proud of being a Hindu is after I met Guruji. I'll be honest. Before that, I was ashamed because I didn't really even know my own culture. I wanted to be Western. But after I met him, it was the first time I'm like, I am proud to be a Hindu. I am proud to walk this path of Sanatana Dharma. And that because for me, it's just this sheer love that he radiates, right? And that radiates the way that he teaches, the way that he speaks, the way that he encourages us to go deeper into the path. Those are all of the things that is the special sauce. And so when I'm going and I'm speaking, I'm talking with people, I try my best. And you told me this actually, and I've always used it from when we first met. You were saying, Guruji told you that when you give a talk, it's important to first feel within yourself the experience you want to give them, right? And so I've used that. For like 10 years, I've used that. And so for me, whenever I give a talk, I'm like, I want people to feel his love. And if they feel that love, then everything else, if I'm wearing a tilak, if I'm wearing shorts, if I'm black, white, Mexican, it doesn't matter. Because they feel the love, they want to know the love, they want to meet him.
Yeah.
The moment they meet him, they start to go deeper in the path. And so for me, that's the common ground for everything that we've discussed. Is if they feel his love, everything can change.
Well, that's a beautiful thought. No, because this is actually the crux of everything. When real love, when you experience real love, and that's what Guruji is, real love. When you experience real love, everything else falls away. Sexual orientation, national identities, everything that we concern ourselves with in this world is evaporated, dissolves when in the presence of something so much more real and more important. And I think it's the same thing we all experience as human beings. You might have 10 little niggling problems in your life, and then one bigger problem comes, you forget about all of those. That's the only thing that matters.
Exactly.
And so the same thing for the positive in the reverse. You have, we're trying to navigate Indian culture in America, Westerner in India, etc., etc. But when you get to the real essence that's behind all of these games that we play, you just go, man, I don't care. Like, those things just don't bother me whatsoever. I'll wear what you want. I'll talk with whoever's in front of me, because we're exchanging the real stuff here.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's just be honest. Even with us, if we look at our lives, you were on the other side of the world, growing up in India. I was growing up in the West. There's no reason why we should ever have met or even have agreed on anything.
Yeah.
But I have the pleasure to call you one of my closest friends. It's because we have come together because of love.
Well, there's a magnet that holds us together, which is his love.
It's amazing.
Sweet, man. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think we'll leave it there for now. I think I'd love to do some more philosophical episodes maybe with you in the future.
We can go into those things.
We can dive into the ideas of God. But
Mahabharata.
That'd be a cool one. So actually, now that you brought that up, so Chida and I have disagreements on the Mahabharata, which is very good. People have been asking me, when are you going to have someone on the channel that disagrees with you on something?
Okay.
So we need to have some on-camera fights about why Bhishma is better than Yudhishthir, in my opinion.
Okay.
And he believes the opposite.
Qualified. We have to qualify everything, right?
Okay. But that's the trailer for the next episode. Yes. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Swami.
Till next time. Jai Gurudev.